Welcome to A Celtic State of Mind. I'm John Dykes and I'm joined by Colin Watts and Alan Morrison to talk about 9 in a row. How are you doing, gents?
Aye, very good.
Don't be shy. We're only celebrating 9 league titles in a row. Colin, when the news came through, what was your reaction? Were you working? Were you working from home? What's your setup at the moment?
Yeah, I was working from home. We were kind of anticipating the news coming through all morning, so really checking social media, keeping an eye on Twitter, seeing what was happening. And then when the news came through from the SPFL, it was almost a sort of sense of relief, I think. There was always that slight doubt in your mind that someone was going to take this to court or someone was going to go down some sort of legal route with it. But as soon as the news got announced, it was a big smile across the face, and you just knew that was job done for the season. Let's move on and keep going towards a 10.
Now, it's difficult sometimes to take it all in, Alan, because of the circumstances we're in. When you're at a game and you've got that passion and you're with like-minded individuals and you're surrounded by thousands and thousands of Celtic fans, or even if you're watching it on the other side of the world in a bar full of Celtic fans, or you're watching it in a house full of Celtic fans, you take it in because you're surrounded by the atmosphere and the passion and the emotion. It's been a strange one today, I've got to admit. Alan, has it actually sank in with you yet?
I don't think it has. I think I was, when I saw the article, the SPFL on the site, I was probably a little bit more elated than I thought I was going to be, because I think we all knew it was coming. Obviously, it's not great circumstances for anybody, not ideal, and you'd love to see it on the park, one in the traditional way. So I was prepared to be underwhelmed, but when I saw the news, I was actually a little leap of joy, because it's well deserved. It is definitely well deserved by any way you want to look at it. Nobody wanted to do it this way. Let's be honest. I'll be honest about it. Nobody did. And it is imperfect in that sense, but the Celtic were the better team over the season, and I don't see that there was any other logical way of doing it. And I'm obviously easy to say as a Celtic supporter, but I really don't see any other logical way of resolving it.
I think the big thing for me was, although I totally agree with you and I thought there's absolutely nothing else that could be done here and this was the right decision, Scottish football's a strange basket case, isn't it, where anything can happen and nothing would surprise me. So I think it was a sense of relief, first and foremost, that there was no deviation from the most sensible decision. And that was first and foremost my reaction. And then you start thinking about, growing up, Alan, and being fed the stories of 9 in a row. And in a small mining village in Fife called High Valleyfield, there being a bridge, and actually if you're driving from Dunfermline to Kincardine, you pass High Valleyfield. Most people put the foot down at that point. But there's a bridge that you go over, and someone got a big set of ladders and painted 10 in a row on the bridge underneath the bypass, and it's still there. And when you're growing up, you think to yourself, what the hell happened there? 10 in a row, and you start learning the stories. That graffiti might actually come back into fashion next season. So when you're being brought up with your family and everybody that you know, really feeding your mind with the Lisbon Lions and the great days of the 60s and the 70s, we are now living that. There's massive differences, obviously, in the Scottish game and the European game. Colin, what are you looking forward to next season? What do you foresee for Scottish football next season, and particularly for Celtic?
I think it's going to be certainly a very interesting season, probably the most interesting season we've had for a long time. As we've mentioned on the podcast before, and David Lowe's explained it really well, we don't know what the finances of Scottish football are going to look like when we come out of this. There's talk down south of the games going to get played behind closed doors, but for every game that gets played behind closed doors, there's talk of millions of pounds a game getting lost. teams down there can only afford that due to the TV deal that they've got. Up here, it's just not possible. I was listening to one of the phone-ins the other day, and it was Mark Wilson was talking, and he was saying if you're doing the 2 metre distancing thing, for the amount of fans that they get at Brecon games, they could spread them round the stadium if they'd done the 2 metre distancing thing, which sounds like plausible for grounds where there is big bits of open space. But how are you meant to sort of police that? So even that idea and that aspect of things, just there doesn't seem to be, under the current legislations that's put out there by the government, any sort of way how we can get fans through the gate. And we know that 70 or 80% of the club's revenue across Scotland comes from fans across the gate. So without that, how many clubs are actually going to survive?
I know, and it is something that we have mentioned on the podcast quite a few times, Colin, and it was actually quite a bleak reminder if any of you read the Celtic statement, which thanked the fans and dedicated the title win, obviously, but there was a paragraph in there reminding everybody just how precarious the situation is, even for a club like Celtic. So you're reading that, you're celebrating, you're in a great mood, but then that stark reminder of the times in which we are living, unfortunately. Now, I'm not going to say that I have no doubt that Celtic are going to come through this. They're certainly going to come through it, having been affected by it, Alan. And I think that it's going to take some time next season. However Scottish football is going to look, it's going to take some time for us to get to a point where we're all getting back to a normal existence in terms of normal life, never mind going to watch the football. And it could well be the turn of the year before we're able to go back to Celtic Park. Now, in a scenario such as that, is there something that could be done on an emergency basis with regards to broadcasting, whereby it's more of a money maker? Because I know that, just like Colin says there, we rely in the Scottish game on the fan base that we've got. I mean, everybody knows per head of capita the Scottish game is way up the table in European football, often topping that table, but there's an over-reliance on it because we don't have the sponsorship or the broadcasting deals. I mean, obviously, I have been fairly bleak in my own views myself over the last few weeks, and when I spoke to David Lowe. Obviously, we've got to enjoy this, but I am looking ahead to next season. How do you foresee it panning out next season?
Yeah, I unfortunately have a tendency to be a little bit bleak myself, probably because I try and look for the facts rather than the emotion of it. I would not be surprised if there wasn't a next season, and I wouldn't be surprised if there maybe even wasn't a 10 in a row, because medical friends that I have are unanimous in that this is something that which we as a population are going to have to live with. There isn't necessarily going to be an easy way to manage the virus out of all existence, which means we're going to have to manage the environments, and football grounds are clearly one of the most problematic as well. Any large gathering of people will be problematic, and actually it will impact the larger clubs probably disproportionately. As Colin said, a community club like Brecon with a couple of hundred people could probably put on a football match. The risks are probably relatively lower, and the costs are probably relatively lower. And the part-time players are not wholly reliant on that, and wouldn't necessarily walk away to other jobs. Possibly they could continue to survive on even a reduced part-time basis. But a full-time club like a Celtic with enormous resource, enormous costs on a month-on-month basis, it's going to be a real challenge. How do you? Because I mean, even funding a game on the basis of all the testing, all the equipment, all the protocols, all the time it takes, etc. That in itself would be quite prohibitive for a lot of Scottish clubs. I think we're all probably quite confident that Celtic as an entity will survive this in some form, maybe in a reduced form. But for the other Scottish clubs, especially those that really don't have many margins for for losing any potential income, it's very bleak indeed. When you mentioned at the top of the programme there that you were kind of anticipating, with it being Scottish football, that something crazy will happen, somebody would change their mind, some politics would be at play. But actually it's quite telling that on Friday, the message came out, all clubs were unanimous that this decision was going to be made, and sure enough, it's what happened today. And if you think about that, that's quite a step forward, and it does suggest to me that the need to get that prize money, such as it is, remaining out the door is absolutely critical, and the need to find a solution to get the next season and unlock the new deal is absolutely crucial for those clubs, and nothing trumps that. All rivalries were put aside at that point, and that tells you quite a lot about how serious the situation is.
Yeah, it was a decision based on survival, Colin, wasn't it?
Yeah, and I think on that basis, that's the reason why there will be a Premier League in Scotland next year, is because of the sponsorship and the Sky deal and the potential lost revenue. I think they're going to at least try do something. There's a lot of teams out there that will not survive if we don't try something. I think they totally understand the fact that we are going to have to look at different ways to try and bring revenue into the game, whether it be to try and sell these games that wouldn't be on the television normally on a sort of pay-per-view basis, or whatever the plan seems to be. It seems as though Celtic have already started looking into this. I seen a tweet come out from one of the media team asking for the feedback from fans that watched the German Bundesliga games this weekend. So I think Celtic are certainly putting some plans in place for games getting behind closed doors. And their statement tonight to the London Stock Exchange explaining the scenario of coronavirus to Celtic, the statement was really to congratulate everyone for winning the trophy, but they explained that they believe this is a short-term issue, but in the long term they believe they will be fine, and they're already planning for next season, looking at potential signing targets, and they don't believe that they'll be affected too much. And I think, as you said, I mean, Celtic is probably going to be one of the teams that come out of this not completely unscathed, but I wouldn't say that it would be a deep loss for Celtic. Teams like, I don't want to pick on anyone, but if you look at Hearts, I mean, this relegation, this thing's going to cost them the best part of £500,000 at least. I mean, for a team like that, they're going to lose revenue. They're going to have to go and play teams like Morton instead of having the derbies against Hibs and having Rangers and Celtic there. It's a lot of money they're going to lose.
Yeah, I mean, there's always the losses associated with being relegated, Colin, but obviously that is compounded by the current circumstances that surround day-to-day life. Colin, 2 points, picking up on something you said there. First and foremost, what was your thoughts on the German football being played behind closed doors?
I was a fan. I liked it. I don't know if it's just because it's been so long since the football's been on, but we had a Zoom party, a couple of my pals, and we sat and watched it, and we had our coupons on, and none of us won anything, which says a lot. But it was good. It was good to get some sort of normality back. Don't get me wrong, watching the first sort of 10-15 minutes of it, it felt very much like a pre-season friendly. There was that sort of feel about it. But once the goals started going in, it just seemed like a regular game. The atmosphere, obviously, a bit eerie without having any fans, and the players being so far apart on these makeshift benches that they put together with the masks and stuff. But it was just football at the end of the day, and it was good to see it back. And I think this is probably just something we're going to have to get used to. As you say, probably until maybe the turn of the year. This could be the new norm, is it?
Whatever normality is, Colin, absolutely. Alan, I'm now thinking about the technological advances that we've had over the last few years, and the fact that, you know, there are hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people worldwide tuning into illegal streams every single week, watching the football, Scottish football, and streams all over Europe. You can watch just about any team you want, any game you want. I did notice, not that I was searching, but certainly for some Celtic games, the club, I think it was a club, had stamped down on that because they were actually becoming very, very difficult to get. And I know the technological advances are fine, because when you think about even just a podcast, for example, tonight, if I was to slip in an Oasis tune tonight, as soon as that's uploaded, there's software available to Speaker, YouTube, iTunes, and it would basically just be pulled there and then. So there are technological advances that may assist clubs in being able to take a brand and then market it differently to suit where we are when you think of technology. My question would be, as a season ticket holder, for example, let's say, Colin, I don't want you to tell me how much it costs, but on average, what you talk...
This year's season ticket is £550. Right,
so would you say 550 is an average, or 500 is an average, or?
So for the upper tier, it's about 550 odd. Lower tier, you're talking about 500.
Right. So what we'd then be looking at is, beyond the novelty, Colin, you wanting your football fix, and then organising Zoom parties, because I can't see that being a normal thing every single week, for the foreseeable future. Would fans be prepared to ditch all the illegal streams and all this kind of stuff and buy season tickets whereby they're not attending games, but they're getting behind a paywall to watch football? I mean, is that something that we could perhaps look at? Do you think that's something that clubs are looking at, Alan?
I think it would definitely be. I think a lot of fans, not all by any means, but many fans would want to find a way to fund the club, support the club in that sense, and they'll find a way to do it. Also, I think that the new normal is, we need to be prepared that it could be very different, both in the sense of the football and the organisation of the football, but also the way that it's shown and consumed. Really, the clubs will be eager to look at every opportunity. Broadcasters will be eager to look at every opportunity. So all these, very specific and restrictive arrangements may kind of unravel just out of expediency for everyone to try and get a piece of what's going to be a much smaller pie all round, and deals are going to have to be done and so forth. And I think that extends to organisation of football as well. If we are here in January and no supporters are allowed in, which is perfectly feasible, really. The especially in the UK, where, and again, without getting into the politics of it, we've been quite quick. We're slow to lock down and quite quick to roll that back. Certainly in England, the risk of a second significant wave spike is quite great. So, I think we could easily be here in January in a very different situation. And the different the football boundaries as well as the media boundaries may be up for grabs as well. So I think all these things are absolutely possible. I do have to say, I enjoyed listening to Colin and his reaction to the football, and I'm jealous that you're such a positive kind of guy, Colin, because I did a little poll. I just not a formal poll on Twitter, but just a kind of informal, asking the question, and I got quite a lot of responses on it. And I would put the responses about the game, the German, it was the Dortmund game, it was the first game, into sort of three camps. There was a small number of people who said, if it was Celtic, I don't care if there's no fans, I'll watch it and I'll be passionate about it. If it was my team, I'll watch it. Then there was a few people that said, it was all right. I had a bet on it, and that gave me some interest. So yeah, it was good to see football back. But the vast majority of people were like, it's soulless. It's just not the same. And certainly, if it wasn't their team, they wouldn't be watching it. And I pretty quickly lost interest in it. And even when the goal went in, it's funny you said that, because my reaction when the goal went in and Haaland scored, and he genuinely didn't know what to do, and I don't think the players knew what to do, and it just didn't seem like it really mattered, because there wasn't half the stadium in bottles, and there wasn't the other half of the stadium going mental. It just didn't. It seemed like it just didn't matter. It really didn't matter. And if it looks like that, then that's a pretty difficult thing to pull off, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think that's where the sort of pre-season friendly aspect of it came about. You see a lot of these games that go in front of empty stadiums when you go to pre-season friendlies, especially when we watched maybe Celtic over in Austria before the season started. There was a lot of times where you're playing behind closed doors to maybe three men and a dog, and you get the sort of response, and you could hear the coaches shouting. And that's an interesting part of it, actually, for me, was, although I can't say I'm fluent in German, but even the different strategies that the coaches and the players are trying to map out, I think it would be an interesting insight into football. Certainly with the talk now that the English teams are going back to doing training tomorrow with an outlook of being back in the middle of June, I think that will probably pique a lot more people's interest because it's players that they know. I think the problem with the German football was people know about maybe Dortmund and Bayern Munich and some other teams like Gladbach because you've played them over recent years. But the best game of the weekend for me was actually yesterday, and it was Cologne versus Mainz, and it finished 2-2. And Cologne were 2-0 up at one point, and Mainz pulled it back to 2-2. And it was a really good game, and it was end to end. And it was almost, without if you take the aspect of the fact that there was no crowd, it was a really competitive game of football, and it was one that was really worth watching. So I think people could open their eyes and maybe see that there's more football out there than just the big teams.
But do you think there's a hurdle? Sorry, Colin. Do you think there's a hurdle though? And that hurdle to me is that hurdle that says, why are they doing this? They're doing this for TV. They're doing this for sponsors. It's absolutely just reeks of contractual obligation. That's why they're there. Because the players are human beings. Do they really want to be there? How many of them are feeling anxious? We don't know what each of their individual circumstances are. Relatives that are vulnerable, etc. All of that is yet to really, and that hasn't had a voice, and that hasn't had a voice because the media has been dominated by chairmen and TV people that want to get these things on, come high or hell water, for the reasons that I've just said. So I just personally, emotionally, cannot get over that contractual obligation thing in my head, and that's why they're doing it. It's not real football.
I think they would have lost millions and millions of pounds from the TV deals and from their sponsorship deals. And it was clear that the sponsors were trying to make up for it at the weekend. You could see there was definitely additional sponsorship right round the sort of park. But I think that there's a thing about football that brings people together. And I think that can't be understated. When you think back when during the war, when the Allies and the Nazis are playing football together and things like that, and how football's always been a thing that can bring a country together. Now, I'm not saying football's going to cure coronavirus. I'm not saying that in the slightest, but it does kind of boost morale a bit just to see this has been here, it's always been here, and there's going to be a future at the end of it, and football's going to be a part of it. And I think as much as it was a sort of we have to do this, we're contractually obliged to do this and get it on as soon as possible, UEFA's told us we need to do this, there was also that sort of fact for a lot of players that this is all they've done their whole career, so to get back and playing football, it was probably a weight off their shoulders.
I think Alan and I have spoken a fair bit about it being a great leveller, certainly in terms financially as well, Colin, because everybody's going to be hit by it. But I also think that there can come a point where people take the game for granted, and I don't just mean people going to the games, because obviously there's a huge amount of passionate supporters, particularly at Celtic Park, but perhaps the players, the mercenary attitude that's crept in over the last few years within the modern age, if they don't already realise the importance of the fans, might see a newfound gratitude towards what they bring to the stadium, particularly when they're playing in front of empty terraces or stands. But with all that put to one side for a few moments, let's have a look at 9 in a row, and let's actually enjoy that, because obviously the reality of next season, as Alan quite rightly said at the very beginning, is no one actually knows. No one actually knows exactly what's happening. But here we've spoken about some of the considerations. Colin, let's have a look over the last year and some of your highlights of this particular season. I mean, we were coming into this, I'm pretty sure people were still doubting Neil Lennon after he got the job permanently after the Scottish Cup win against Hearts to seal the treble. And, overall, a couple of wee blips, but a fairly impressive season.
Oh, definitely. And my girlfriend takes absolute no pleasure in telling me how much that I was wrong about Neil Lennon's appointment. She always believed that Lennon coming back was a good thing for the club. On the day that he got announced and the manner that he got announced, I was actually quite annoyed. I thought we would go for a sort of bigger name. I thought Lennon was only kind of in there for the interim. But fair play to him. He's been absolutely outstanding. And it takes me back actually to something that Paddy McCourt said to you when you were interviewing him not that long ago. And he said he had to play a sort of style of football to get through when he was first the interim manager. And then when he had the job full time, he could implement his own style of football. And I certainly think that's what he's done this time round as well. When he took over from Rodgers, he knew there was a style of football that the players were comfortable with. And he sort of tried to get that right through the rest of the season. But when we hit the start of this season, he hit the ground running and it was a totally different style. And it was his style of football. It was an attacking style of football. And it's been a joy to watch. There was a stat put out to me, and probably Alan, you'll know this already, but we've scored more goals in the 30 league games this season than what we did for the whole of last season. So it shows that the football's been absolutely entertaining. When it comes to highlights, there's been so many, to be honest. I was lucky to be in Rome for the Lazio away game, and that's probably going to be one of my highlights of the whole decade, never mind this season. But there was things like Scott Brown's last-minute winner against Hamilton, and the importance of that. So there's been so many highlights of this season, and Lennon was right in what he came out and said today. We've absolutely deserved this because we have played the best football in Scotland, and without a shadow of a doubt, we would have went on to win that title. And to be honest, if we can build on what we've got, fill in a couple of positions which I think we're still lacking in, then we should be, without doubt, the favourites for next season as well.
What positions are you thinking, Colin?
I think there's still some doubt out there around the fullback areas. I know we've kind of managed to get through this season and we've seen the introduction of Jeremy Frimpong, who I think is probably going to be the future at right back. At left back, Greg Taylor's come in and played really well after Bolingoli's start. I think Bolingoli was sort of made to be the scapegoat for the game that we lost against Rangers. And I think that was pretty unfair on him. But between the injuries that him and El Hamed's had, there's probably some strengthening needing done there. Probably left midfield as well. We've sort of struggled this season. Played Ryan Christie out there quite a lot. And I would probably still have a third choice striker because I don't think the likes of Kamala or Bayo's got it for Celtic, to be honest.
No. Alan, what's your thoughts on highlights of the season and what players have impressed you particularly?
Yeah, so I echo a lot of what Colin said. In fact, I agree with all of what Colin said, actually. So I think just to back up with some numbers on what he said there, 2.87 goals per game is actually the highest in 15 years, in fact, going back to O'Neill's time. So that's phenomenal. And actually our goal difference, if you look at goals scored, goals conceded, of an average of over 2 goals, 2.27 goal difference per game. I don't even remember the last time that we averaged more than a goal difference of 2 a game. And actually it's not undeserved, because if you look at expected goals, I'm not going to get to down this rabbit hole, don't worry, but even expected goals, it's our highest for 5 years and it's our lowest against 5 years, and therefore obviously the expected goal difference is the best for 5 years. And that speaks to a tremendous consistency. So when you sort of say, what's the highlight? I think the ones that Colin mentioned are spot on. But it's just the sheer relentlessness, which I think is a feature of a Lennon side. 26 wins out of 30 is quite something, really. We would have potentially, got to over 100 points, and if we'd scored 11 goals in the last 8 games, it would have certainly got over 100 goals, and that's always a tremendous benchmark in both of those things. I think one of the interesting features of the season is that, I think we've been generally very good in most games. There's been a nice... I like the fact that even the games that we drew, we came back from losing positions to get the point. There's been quite a few late goals and comebacks in that regard. But when we were bad, we were terrible. And it didn't happen very often, but it happened in big games and we were awful. Cluj, Copenhagen, the home game against the Rangers, and even the League Cup final against the Rangers was a really poor performance, actually, apart from Foster and Julian. So that's the kind of slight... It's not a sting in the tail as such, but it's just an interesting feature of the season that there weren't too many. I mean, under Dyler, there was a lot of average performances. There weren't too many average performances. We got the job done pretty comprehensively, and 90% of the time. But when it was bad, it was really bad, and it was in key games. I think that's something I hope that Neil Lennon reflects on. So I agree with Colin. I wasn't disappointed when he was appointed. I was kind of a bit meh, if I'm being honest. That was about it. I was just kind of, I'm sure you'll be all right, and I'm pleased for him. But, I was hoping for something a bit shinier kind of thing. But my goodness, does he deserve this now? And he deserves the build on this, absolutely. I don't personally think Neil Lennon will ever be remembered as a great football manager, great football coach or tactician. But my goodness, does he get the club? Does he understand? And does he feel comfortable in his own skin doing this job? And I hope he keeps improving. He's still a relatively young man in that place, and so I think there's room for him to improve, especially in the European arena. Clearly in the games that I've mentioned. So with those, I always try and give a balanced view in that respect. So but just the relentlessness again. That run of games after January, because we're losing the game on the 29th of December. The league was really tight, and it's frustrating because we've had this financial dominance for all these years. And you sort of think, why aren't we miles ahead? And to come back and then win at Kilmarnock, at St Johnstone, at Hamilton, at Motherwell, scoring 3-3, 4-4, beating Hearts 5-0. That statement straight after the disappointment at home to the Rangers was, I think, that run was my favourite bit, I think, of the season.
Yeah, definitely.
And Neil Lennon himself said the target was 100 goals. I think back to the time where I interviewed Neil at the Royal Concert Hall. I don't like to mention that often, Colin, that we did that sold-out show in Glasgow. But afterwards, there was an interesting discussion with Neil's right-hand man, who said that Neil Lennon will be back. But he said it in such a way that I left that concert hall that night thinking he will be back. And he did. He came back. So I think there was far less of a surprise, I think, when that announcement was made for me, because I just got this feeling that it was going to happen in any case. So there was probably less disappointment for myself, Alan. But I think when you've had what is often called the box office manager that Brendan Rodgers undoubtedly was, I don't think you can then follow that up with another one and another one, particularly when you've got a club and a team that's in such a good position at that stage, winning trebles, and that's never going to be easy by any manner of means. But Neil Lennon's risen to the challenge, and I keep talking about the comment Danny McGrain made regarding the fact that in terms of coaching, he doesn't get as much credit as he deserves because he's unfashionable. He's unfashionable. All of a sudden, you've got a rookie manager coming in at Ibrox, and the media are fawning over him, allowing him to say whatever he wants from day one, actually up at Pittodrie in relation to refereeing, and never questioning that. And the facts are Neil Lennon's results are far superior to this rookie manager who's come up and been given really an easy time of it in his spell up here. But I mean, when we look back on the 9 successive titles, it makes it even more remarkable when you think about the fact that Jock Stein led Celtic to those 9 in a row, and we've utilised 3 managers, one of whom has had 2 spells. He started off this run and he took us right up to the 9, and it looks as though he'll take us beyond the 9. When you think back to Dyla and Rodgers, obviously an important part of this particular run, how fondly or otherwise do you look back, Colin, on these other 2 managers who have contributed to the 9 in a row?
It's funny. I seen a thing on Twitter today, and it came up on my memories on Facebook for those that use social media. It was about 9 years ago today, or maybe 10 years ago, whatever way it works out, that we played the last game at home against Motherwell, and we knew that the title was over, but we were 3 or 4 goals up. The stadium was packed. Everyone was jumping about. We were all doing the huddle, just can't get enough. There was a real party atmosphere in the stadium that day. And Neil Lennon came out with a famous quote, "This is not the end, this is just the beginning." And he's been proven right. And for the 9 years since then, it's been a roller coaster of a ride, definitely. Lennon's first term, I always thought that he was helped a lot by his backroom staff. I think he had some really good backroom staff there. And I think that's probably part of Lennon's success as a manager, is the team that he builds around him. When we go back then and you look at the likes of Gary Parker and stuff like that was helping him, Johan Mjalby and Alan Thompson, they were all guys that sort of knew the club and helped Lennon kind of get through that era. And I think that's maybe where Ronnie Dyler's failings sort of came in. I always think Ronnie Dyler's a great coach, whether he's got the managerial experience, it's still kind of yet to be proven. He's done well in Norway, but and he did relatively well over here. But I always think that he could have really used someone that was more senior than him to kind of guide him through there, a sort of director of football position. Brendan Rodgers, apart from the fact of how he left, Brendan Rodgers' period at Celtic was almost perfect. If you take out Europe, his success domestically was pretty much perfect. It was what you expected from Celtic because they were going through this decade of dominance. This was Celtic's time to shine. And the Invincible season was one of the best seasons to ever be a Celtic fan. So there was a lot there to enjoy. And as I said, if it wasn't for the fact that how he left the club and he's basically soured his time at the club, then he would be looked back at a lot more fondly. And as I've already mentioned, when Lennon came in, he played that sort of style of football to get us through to the position that he's in, and then stamped his own mark on the side. And throughout the whole sort of 9 years that we look back on, there's been some incredible games, there's been some terrible performances, but we'll always remember the good games. We'll never really remember the bad ones, and we'll always remember the players that were there the whole way through. And what's kind of shone out there is Scott Brown and James Forrest will go down as two club legends for the rest of the time.
You definitely will. I mean, I would add on to the Brendan Rodgers failings in the fact that in the transfer market, I thought it was questionable quite a lot of the time. I think he's brilliant at developing players. I think he can get the buy-in, his methodology works. He gets this ideal into a dressing room and people believe in it, both senior and the young guys in the changing room, which is important. But I think when it came to actually talent spotting, you know, he brought in Jack Hendry, which is bemusing. Nothing personal against the guy. He's a better footballer than I'll ever be, but he was never, ever going to be the answer. Jack Hendry was never going to be the answer, and it didn't take me to kind of notice that. But, I mean, the scouting reports that Rodgers was getting on Hendry was that he was outstanding. And you think to yourself, well, there's £1.5 million, and the other answer that Rodgers thought was Marvin Compere. And meanwhile, he's got a player in Eric Sviatchenko who, you know, he wasn't amazing, but he was better than those two. And Rodgers throws him out and eventually he leaves. So I think he definitely was beyond perfect, although in his mind he was perfect. Ronnie Deila was a talent spotter, an absolute talent spotter who, I think you're right, he didn't have his own backroom team there, Colin, so it would have been interesting to see him in full flow had he had his own guys in his backroom team. He was brought in as a number 2, obviously. Everyone knows the story, and then before you know it, the familiarity of the club and of Scottish football is added by the introduction of John Collins. So that must have been difficult for Deila, but I think when you look at the players that he's introduced to the side and the players that we signed under his watch, and I'm thinking obviously Chris Ayer and Ryan Christie, introducing Kieran Tierney, Callum McGregor. I mean, his legacy, I think, is in the players that he introduced. Rodgers had great success, but he didn't do it in Europe, you're spot on, and he left us with a lot of players that really we had no use for, and you know, in big wages as well. And I think Neil Lennon, you know, when you look at the players that we've brought in both spells, his recruitment is excellent. You know, by and large, it's excellent. You look at some of the signings he's made in the first spell, you know, Gary Hooper, the famous ones with regards to Wanyama and Van Dijk, you know, and then when you look at the second spell, his best signing for me has been Fraser Foster, and he's got an eye for a player, isn't he? And I know that there are some players who, you know, he doesn't identify them. You know, he's not seen them in a game and thinks he's the guy for me. They're identified through a scouting network. But Neil Lennon invariably decides whether or not a player's coming in. Interesting also, Colin, you said about some of the players that we've got there. Bayo and Klamala. Haven't seen enough of Klamala, but I've seen enough of Bayo to know that he's not going to be a second or third choice at Celtic Park. So yeah, looking back, I'm not being too hard on Rodgers, but it's certainly there was a few things in there. And then when you think about the situation with Dembele that transpired as well, which was just, it was grotty, it was a horrible way to end his career at Celtic. And then, you know, when he's coming out and he's speaking about the board publicly in interviews, Terminado, I remember that interview and you're thinking, what's going on here? So, yeah, very much soured. And, you know, it's one of these things where there's going to be a situation where he will have to be invited back to Celtic at some stage, wouldn't he? Be that for an end-of-season celebration when we win the 10 to commemorate that, when we fly Ronnie Deila back over from New York, and I'm pretty sure Brendan Rodgers will need to be part of that. I don't think Celtic fans will be so vehement as they were at the time, Alan. Personally, I'm over it. What's your thoughts on the Rodgers and the Dyla legacies?
Yeah, so I'm taking Rodgers. I guess I'm not. I'm always very cynical about the cult of personality, and especially as regards football managers. The power that one person can wield has to be quite limited. So I wasn't massively ecstatic when he signed. I was really pleased, and I was very surprised at the way it ended, obviously, and disappointed it ended the way it did. But it is football, and the banality of it. Nothing surprises you, really, to be honest. I think you've kind of covered it, really. That first season, the football was absolutely terrific. The speed and aggressive attacking of Roberts and Armstrong and Dembele was just fantastic to watch, and everything went his way. I think, what was it now? Forgotten. 24 maybe, goals from outside the box. I mean, everything went in, really, and it wasn't actually sustainable, and it wasn't sustainable. The form wasn't as good in seasons 2 or 3, and Europe. The worst thing that happened to Rodgers was going toe to toe with Manchester City and getting 2 draws, and he carried that philosophy on in the remaining games, and we got absolutely taken apart. Just crying out for some cynical defending to be done in some of these games, away at Barcelona, even at home to Paris or whatever it might be. That naivety or its ego, really thinking that he can coach with the best with any sort of set of players. It's just not realistic. But no, he did a fantastic job. The football was generally good. I take on board and agree with everything you said about the signings as well. With Dyla, again, I think all Celtic fans have got a great deal of admiration and warmth towards Ronnie Dyla, and I would certainly be in that camp. I think, again, points well made. He seemed like a coach who was forced to be the manager. He spoke a very good game. He talked about the football that he wanted to play, and again, it was a very aggressive, pressing kind of game, and it never really transpired. The football was actually quite slow, quite pedestrian at times. He always played 2 holding midfield players, even in home games in the SPFL. And it just felt like he didn't have the strength of personality to really, to drive those players to greater things and to reach their potential, which somebody like a Rodgers, incredibly self-confident does. And actually Lennon has got a lot of gravitas, and clearly the players believe in him. And, that you need that to be a manager of a club like Celtic is not an easy job. You've got to have an incredibly large ego and excellent man management skills in the main. The thing I never forget about Rodgers, just going back to him briefly, is remember there's quite a famous clip where he gives, I think it's Raheem Sterling, a dressing down, and it's all on camera, and everyone sort of holds this up as putting the rich footballer, arrogant young player in his place. And I just thought that's absolutely appalling, because I'm sure we've all managed people in the past, and you just don't do that. You praise in public and you have a word in private. That's as simple as that. It doesn't matter what job it is. You don't treat people like that. And the Dembele thing, like you said, it kind of stunk a little bit in that regard as well. But no, listen, on balance, great years, great memories. That goal when Rodgers scored the goal to win the treble, and we're dancing around our front room with my kids, was just one of the most wonderful memories. And thank God, thank you for those memories, really. And Dyla, I think he did the best he could with the abilities that he had in the position that he was in, frankly. And that sounds incredibly patronising, but I think you know what I mean.
Oh, definitely. And I think it was an interesting point on the back of the interview I did with John Hughes, where we established that Celtic would have been going for 5 trebles in 6 seasons had it not been for an appalling refereeing decision against Inverness Cali and a worldwide pandemic. So there you go. That shows you the domination that we've had in Scottish football. But I mean, I hope that Scott Brown is going to celebrate tonight by shaving his head. Colin, how are you celebrating this evening for 9 in a row?
Well, not as much as I'd want to. Working tomorrow, unfortunately. I'm sure I'll have a couple of drinks at the weekend, definitely to celebrate it. What I'm looking forward to is having a look back at this season properly, now that it's finished. Watching back some of the games that kind of got us to the 9 in a row. And if you're looking for some games, then there is an article just coming out on Axom, the kind of 5 games that sort of led us towards 9 in a row. And you'll be able to find them. I think BT are showing them. You'll get them on YouTube. Certainly worth going back and taking a look at this season as a whole, because some of the football we played at times was outstanding. When I think back to like that time when we went to Fir Park and we pulled out one of the best performances of the season, certainly when we beat them 5-2. Motherwell were on a great start to the season and we made them look distinctly average that day. Just kind of going through the season though, Alan, I'd be interested to know statistically what really was our best performance of the season.
Yes, don't put me on the spot though. I'll have to go away and think about that one.
That'll be next week's podcast for a Celtic State of Mind with Alan and I.
That'll be a nice counterpoint, Colin. If you do your piece, then maybe I'll follow up with 5 best performances purely from a kind of number of shots, number of quality of chances, that kind of thing, rather than the aesthetic aspect of it too much. Absolutely.
Now, as Colin said, that article will be on A Celtic State of Mind this evening. Nice plug, Colin. Thank you both, gentlemen, for appearing once again on A Celtic State of Mind on today of all days. It will be a day we will look back on for the rest of our lives. A very special achievement in the world of Celtic.